There's a bank in Basel, Switzerland that you've never heard of, and that's exactly how they want it. It's not on any Forbes list, it doesn't advertise, it doesn't have retail branches, and it's completely immune to the laws of the country it sits in. But every 2 months, the most powerful central bankers on earth fly here in secret. They don't announce their arrival. They don't hold press conferences, and what they discuss is never made public. This is the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS. And it's not just powerful, it's untouchable. It can't be taxed, it can't be raided, its employees can't be arrested, and its archives are sealed. The BIS doesn't answer to governments. It doesn't answer to voters. In fact, it operates above the law entirely. So here's the question no one's asking. How does a single institution in Switzerland control the monetary policy of 63 central banks? And why was it designed that way from the beginning? Because the answer reveals the architectural blueprint of the global financial system. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back to 1930, to a room filled with cigarette smoke, desperate bankers, and a plan to ensure that no government ever again could challenge the power of central banking. And that plan is still running today. The year is 1919. Europe is broken. World War I has ended, but the economic war is just beginning. Germany's currency has collapsed. The French franc is in free fall. The British pound, once the pillar of global finance, is hemorrhaging gold reserves. And here's the problem. Every country in Europe owes money to every other country in Europe. Reparations, war debts, reconstruction loans. It's a tangle of IOUs that no one can untangle. The central bankers, the men who actually controlled the flow of money, saw something the politicians didn't. If one country defaulted, the entire system would collapse. And if that happened, governments might do something dangerous. They might take back control of their own monetary supply. Enter Montague Norman, the most powerful central banker of his generation. Norman was obsessed with one idea. Central banks should be independent from governments, completely independent. In his private correspondence, he wrote, "The government is the enemy of the banking system. Democracy is a threat to sound money." So Norman began a quiet campaign. He traveled across Europe in secret, meeting with his counterparts. No press, no records. And in these meetings, they designed a solution. January 1930, the Hague Conference. Officially, this conference was about Germany's reparations. How much would Germany pay? How would it be distributed? But buried in the agreement was something else entirely. A new institution, not a government body, not accountable to any parliament or Congress. They called it the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS. And they chose Basel, Switzerland for a very specific reason: neutral territory. No government could claim ownership, and Switzerland had a long history of protecting the secrecy of bankers. On May 17, 1930, the BIS opened its doors. Its official purpose, to manage Germany's reparations payments. But its real purpose was something far more powerful. Article 55 of the BIS Charter stated it clearly. The BIS would be immune from government interference. Its meetings would be private, its decisions final. For the first time in history, central bankers had created an institution above themselves, a central bank of central banks. But why did they need to be above the law? Because within a decade, the BIS would be doing business with the enemy. September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. Within a year, Hitler controls most of Europe. Britain stands alone. The United States hasn't entered the war yet. And in Basel, the BIS is still operating. Remember, Switzerland is neutral. The BIS is neutral. That's the official story. But here's what the official story doesn't tell you. From 1939 to 1945, the BIS facilitated gold transactions for Nazi Germany. Gold that had been looted, stolen from the central banks of conquered nations, ripped from the teeth of Holocaust victims. And the man running the BIS, an American named Thomas McTricker. McTricker met regularly with Emil Pool, the Nazi banker who managed Hitler's gold reserves. The BIS became the laundromat. Nazi gold came in dirty and left clean. In 1942 alone, the BIS processed over $300 million in Nazi gold transactions. That's nearly $5 billion in today's money. While millions were being murdered in concentration camps, the BIS was doing business as usual. By 1944, the Allies knew, and they were furious. John Maynard Keynes, the British economist leading the Bretton Woods negotiations, called for the BIS to be shut down immediately. He said the BIS was a necessary instrument for the Nazis and demanded it be dissolved at the earliest possible moment. A resolution was passed. The BIS would be liquidated. But then, something strange happened. The BIS didn't close. It didn't liquidate. In fact, within 2 years, it was more powerful than ever. Because behind closed doors, the central bankers made a deal. The Americans, the British, the French, they all agreed. Publicly, they condemned the BIS, but privately, they needed it. Because the BIS wasn't just a bank. It was the only place where central bankers could coordinate policy without government interference. And after the war, there was a new problem. The rise of communism, the threat of nationalized banking, the fear that governments might seize control of money creation. To the central bankers, that was the real enemy. So the BIS was quietly resurrected, the liquidation order forgotten, and the meetings continued. Every 2 months, no press, no oversight. But here's the real trick, the casino house maneuver that most people never understand. Central banks don't just manage money, they create it. Out of nothing. When a central bank wants to increase the money supply, it doesn't need gold, it doesn't need reserves, it just creates the money. Then it lends that money to the government at interest, which means the government, the people, can never pay it back. The debt only grows. And every hour you work, a portion of your labor goes to servicing that debt, a debt created from nothing. This is the system the BIS was designed to protect, not to serve nations, not to serve people, but to ensure that central banks remain independent and untouchable. And every time the system breaks, the BIS is there to coordinate the response. Because in 1971, everything changed. August 15th, 1971, a Sunday night. President Nixon appears on national television and announces something that will change the world forever. I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold. With one sentence, Nixon severed the last link between money and reality. For decades, the dollar had been backed by gold. If you held a dollar, you could, in theory, exchange it for gold at a fixed rate. But by 1971, America was running out of gold. The Vietnam War, the Great Society programs, the cost of maintaining a global empire. The government needed to spend more than it had, and gold was the constraint. So they removed the constraint. And from that moment on, the dollar became pure fiat, a currency backed by nothing except the promise of the U.S. government. And who coordinated the global response to this shock? Who made sure other central banks played along? The BIS. In the months after Nixon's announcement, the BIS held emergency meetings, secret, closed door. They designed the framework for what would become the modern floating currency system. No gold standard, no fixed exchange rates, just central banks managing currencies backed by trust alone. And for the next 50 years, that system held. The economy boomed, stock markets soared, debt exploded. In 1971, global debt was $1 trillion. Today, it's over $300 trillion. A house that cost $25,000 in 1971 now costs $400,000. Not because houses got better, but because money got cheaper. The dollar has lost 87% of its purchasing power since 1971. That's not inflation by accident. That's inflation by design. You are working harder, but your money buys less. And that's not a bug in the system. It's the system working exactly as designed. September 2008, the system breaks. The biggest banks in the world are insolvent. The housing market collapses. Credit freezes. And where do the central bankers go to coordinate the response? Basel. Within weeks, the BIS helps coordinate the largest money printing operation in human history. The Federal Reserve prints $4 trillion. The ECB prints 5 trillion euros. The Bank of Japan prints 300 trillion yen. The banks that caused the crisis are saved. The people who lost their homes are not. And people are angry. They want accountability. They want answers. Politicians promise reform, but the system doesn't change because the system isn't controlled by politicians. It's controlled by the central bankers. And the central bankers answer to the BIS. March 2020, the world shuts down. The economy is in free fall. Businesses are closing. Unemployment spikes to levels not seen since the Great Depression. And once again, the BIS coordinates. The money printer goes into overdrive. $10 trillion created globally in a single year. And now, 2 years later, we're living with the consequences. Inflation is back. Not the 2% target the central banks promised. Real inflation, double digits in some countries. An entire generation is being priced out of home ownership, not because they're lazy, but because the money supply has been weaponized. They told us it was transitory, that prices would come back down. But history shows us they always knew this would happen, because this is the cycle. Boom, bust, print, inflate. And every time, wealth flows from the many to the few. Since 1971, the wealth gap has exploded. The top 1% now own more than the bottom 50% combined. And the bankers, they're doing just fine. Because the system isn't broken. From their perspective, it's working perfectly. The question now is, how long can they keep it running? Power, in its purest form, doesn't announce itself. It doesn't campaign. It doesn't justify. It simply persists. While you were taught that democracy decides your future, the architecture was already built. You vote for representatives. They vote on budgets, but neither controls the one thing that determines everything: the supply of money itself. You were born into a game with rules you never agreed to, and the referees answer to a different authority. This isn't a conspiracy in the traditional sense. Conspiracies are fragile. They require secrecy. This is architecture, and architecture doesn't hide. It just isn't discussed. Because the real power is in the questions never asked. You're told inflation is a force of nature, like weather, unpredictable, unavoidable. But weather doesn't have board meetings every 2 months. What you're witnessing isn't economic chaos. It's economic architecture functioning exactly as designed. Your purchasing power isn't disappearing into thin air. It's being transferred methodically, predictably. And the mechanism was never voted on. This is the philosophical truth of Basel. Most people spend their lives playing by rules they think are natural laws. Work hard, save money, invest wisely. But the rules were written by those who benefit from the game, and the house always wins. Not because they're cheating, but because they designed the board. The individuals change, the institution persists, and the mandate never wavers. Protect the system, not the people in it, the system itself. Because to those who built this, you're not the beneficiary, you're the collateral. And they made sure you'd have no recourse. This is what Jekyll Island built. This is what Basel perfected. A system where sovereignty isn't taken by force, it's surrendered through ignorance. If you want to stay ahead of the coming shift, join our community. But to understand why the BIS was even possible, you have to look at what happened in a secret meeting on Jekyll Island in 1913. A story I've broken down for you right here.